On February 26, 2022, just 2 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and the European Union made a decision that would forever alter the global financial landscape. They announced that Russia would be cut off from SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. This messaging system connects 11,000 banks in 200 countries and processes an astounding $5 trillion in transactions every single day. Cutting Russia off meant their banks could no longer send or receive international payments, effectively isolating them from global trade. The West celebrated this as the nuclear option of financial sanctions, predicting the ruble would collapse and the Russian economy would implode. However, 2.5 years later, the expected collapse never happened. Instead, Russia found alternatives, and worse for the West, dozens of other countries began building their own systems. This was a classic case of a dominant power weaponizing financial infrastructure, a move that historically accelerates the decline of that power's own dominance. The pattern of financial weaponization has repeated 4 times in the last 110 years, and it follows a predictable 5-stage path. First, a dominant power controls the financial system. Second, they weaponize that system to punish enemies. Third, the targets find alternatives. Fourth, neutral countries begin to hedge their bets, fearing they could be next. Finally, the original weapon loses its power as the foundation of dominance is destroyed. When Britain weaponized finance in 1914, it lost its reserve currency status by 1944. The U.S. weaponized SWIFT in 2022, and according to historical timelines, the clock is now ticking. In fact, modern technology is likely to make this decline much faster than Britain's. To understand why, we must first look at what SWIFT actually is. It's not a bank, but a secure messaging system that authorizes the movement of money. Created in 1973, it became the nervous system of global finance, and while technically neutral, its board is dominated by Western banks, giving the U.S. immense legal leverage. The U.S. had used this weapon before, most notably against Iran in 2012. That move was devastating, causing Iran's oil exports to collapse and inflation to skyrocket. However, the 2022 Russia cutoff was fundamentally different because Russia was a major global energy exporter and a nuclear power. By excluding Russia, the U.S. sent a message to every non-Western nation: if you cross us, you lose access to your money. This created an existential threat for countries like China, India, and Brazil, who realized they needed to build alternatives to ensure their own survival. This is where the SWIFT weapon truly backfired. Looking at the 4 historical precedents reveals the same inevitable outcome. Example 1 is Britain during World War I. Before 1914, the British pound was the world's reserve currency, and London was the center of global finance. When the war began, Britain froze the assets of German companies and banks. This broke a long-standing norm that financial contracts were separate from military conflict. Neutral countries watched in fear and began diversifying their reserves away from London. As a result, the U.S. benefited, and by 1944, the dollar officially replaced the pound. Example 2 occurred in 1979 when President Carter froze Iranian assets in U.S. banks during the hostage crisis. While it provided tactical leverage, it taught OPEC countries that dollar reserves were not truly sovereign. They began reducing their dollar holdings and diversifying into other currencies like the Deutschmark and the yen. Example 3 was the 2014 U.S. sanctions against Russia following the annexation of Crimea. These were targeted sanctions that didn't cut Russia off from SWIFT, but they gave Russia 8 years to prepare. Putin used that time to slash U.S. Treasury holdings, double gold reserves, and develop his own messaging system, SPFS. This leads us to example 4, the 2022 SWIFT cutoff. While the ruble initially crashed, it recovered within 3 months as Russia redirected its trade to China, India, and the Middle East. Russia proved that a country could be cut off from SWIFT and not only survive, but find new ways to thrive. This realization triggered the fourth stage of the backfire pattern: neutral countries hedging their bets. China, seeing what happened to Russia, accelerated its de-dollarization efforts. It reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings significantly and massively increased its gold reserves. China's own payment system, CIPS, began growing at a rate far exceeding SWIFT. Even long-standing U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia began reconsidering their alignment. In 2023, Saudi Arabia broke the 50-year petrodollar monopoly by announcing it would accept yuan for oil sales to China. In December 2024, they joined BRICS, signaling a definitive shift away from exclusive U.S. financial alignment. The other nations, like the UAE, Brazil, and Argentina, also began settling trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. The BRICS nations, now expanded to include oil giants like Iran and the UAE, are actively developing a shared payment system and discussing a common currency backed by gold and commodities. The data proves this shift is happening right now. In 2021, 87% of Russian trade was settled in dollars or euros. By 2024, that number dropped to 60%, with 40% settled in yuan, rubles, and other currencies. China's CIPS more than doubled its transaction volume in just 3 years, now connecting over 1,400 financial institutions worldwide. Central banks are buying gold at the highest sustained rates since the 1970s, right before the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. The petrodollar is no longer a monopoly, and once a monopoly breaks, its advantages disappear rapidly. The U.S. can currently run unlimited budget deficits because the world needs dollars, but as that demand falls, interest rates will spike, and the American standard of living, which relies on cheap imports paid with printed dollars, will become unsustainable. So who wins and who loses in this new world? China is the obvious winner, poised to succeed U.S. financial dominance with its massive manufacturing base and growing yuan-based system. Russia wins strategically by destroying the myth of U.S. financial omnipotence. The BRICS nations gain autonomy and leverage, no longer trapped in dollar dependence. Gold and alternative payment systems also win as trust in fiat currencies and Western infrastructure decline. The losers are the United States and Europe. U.S. hegemony is fading, and with it the ability to spend without consequence. Europe, by tying itself so closely to U.S. sanctions, has also tied itself to the dollar's decline. SWIFT itself will likely lose its global relevance, becoming just one of several competing messaging systems. The timeline for this collapse is roughly 15 to 25 years. If Britain's decline from 1914 to 1944 serves as a guide, we can expect dollar dominance to end between 2037 and 2047. However, technology moves much faster today, and we're already seeing a rapid decline in the dollar's share of global reserves and trade settlement. Financial weapons are like nuclear weapons. You can only use them truly once. After the 2022 cutoff, the world learned its lesson: build alternatives and never be vulnerable to U.S. financial power again. The U.S. had the golden goose of financial dominance, but it strangled it with sanctions. History will likely look back at February 2022 as the moment American financial hegemony ended, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Welcome to the post-dollar world. It's coming faster than you think.